What happens when a joke meant to make me look powerful ends with legal papers in my hand and my husband watching from across the street? How could one careless, smiling remark turn into the final receipt of our marriage? I should have known better than to host another dinner party. But there I was, Thursday evening, arranging cheese and crackers, like I was some kind of domestic goddess, when really I was just Ivadne Hartley, 34-year-old office manager with a mortgage and a husband who worked too much. The townhouse looked perfect, though. Our open-plan kitchen flowed into the living room, all clean lines and carefully chosen throw pillows. I'd spent 2 hours getting everything just right, because appearances matter. They always have. More wine? I asked Jennifer, who was perched on our leather sofa like she owned it. She worked in marketing at some startup downtown and always had opinions about everything. God, yes, she laughed, holding out her glass. I need it after the day I've had. My boss is such a control freak. Tell me about it, I said, pouring generously. Men and their need to micromanage everything. That got a round of knowing nods from the other women. Sarah from my yoga class, Rebecca, who lived 2 streets over, and Jennifer's friend Amanda, who I barely knew, but who seemed to fit right in with our little circle of complaints. Speaking of men, Rebecca said with a sly grin, where's Caleb tonight? Working late again, I said, rolling my eyes dramatically. Some big project deadline. You know how it is. The truth was, I'd told him the party started an hour later than it actually did. I wanted time with just the girls first, time to be myself, without his quiet, watchful presence, making everyone feel like they had to be on their best behavior. Doesn't that drive you crazy? Amanda asked. My ex was like that, always putting work first. Oh, I don't let it bother me, I said, settling into my favorite armchair with my wine. I mean, if he wants to be boring and predictable, that's his choice. I'm not going to sit around waiting for him to remember he has a wife. The words felt good coming out, powerful, like I was in control of my own life instead of just drifting through it. Good for you, Jennifer said, raising her glass. Too many women just accept whatever scraps their husbands throw them. Exactly, I said, warming to the theme. I refuse to be one of those wives who disappears into her marriage. I'm still my own person. That's when I heard the key in the front door, Caleb's voice calling out, Honey, I brought dessert. My stomach did a little flip, but I kept my expression neutral. In here, I called back, not moving from my chair. He appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, holding a white bakery bag. Caleb was 36 but looked older sometimes, especially when he was tired. Tonight his dark hair was mussed, and there were lines around his eyes that made him look like someone's father instead of my husband. Ladies, he said with a polite nod, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder. No problem, Rebecca said sweetly. We were just having girl talk. The best kind, he said with a small smile, starting to unpack what looked like some kind of fancy cake. I'll just put this in the kitchen and get out of your way. And that's when I made the mistake that would change everything. Don't worry about it, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, my voice light and amused. I could swap him out any time if I wanted to. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. I was still smiling, still holding my wine glass, still playing the role of the confident, independent woman who didn't need anyone. But the room had gone quiet. Jennifer's eyebrows shot up. Sarah's mouth formed a little O of surprise. Amanda looked uncomfortable, like she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have. And behind me, I heard the sound of Caleb's chair scraping against the floor. He'd been sitting down at the kitchen island, probably planning to eat a quick bite before disappearing upstairs to let us continue our evening. But now he was standing again, and when I turned to look at him, his face was completely calm. Too calm. Then do it, he said quietly, his voice steady as stone. Swap me out. The bakery bag was still in his hand, half unpacked. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, just permission. like I'd finally given him permission to stop trying. "Caleb," I started, but he was already moving. He set the bag down carefully, methodically, like he was handling something fragile. Then he looked around the room at my friends, all of whom were staring at him with varying degrees of mortification. "Enjoy your evening, ladies," he said politely. "The cake is chocolate mousse, Ivadne's favorite." And then he walked out. I wanted to follow him. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get up, to chase after him, to explain that it was just a joke, just something stupid I'd said to sound clever. But my pride kept me glued to that chair, kept that fake smile plastered on my face, until it must have looked like cruelty. "Well," Jennifer said finally, her voice artificially bright, "that was awkward." "He'll get over it," I said, taking a large gulp of wine. "He's just being dramatic." But even as I said it, I could hear his footsteps upstairs, slow and deliberate, and I knew somehow that this wasn't drama. This was something else entirely. The party fizzled after that. Rebecca made an excuse about having to get home early. Sarah suddenly remembered she had an early morning meeting. Within an hour, they were all gone, leaving me alone with the remains of our perfect evening and a chocolate mousse cake I couldn't bring myself to touch. I sat in the quiet living room, listening to the sounds of Caleb moving around upstairs, drawers opening and closing, the soft thud of something being set down, the rustle of papers. My phone buzzed, a text from my sister Lynn. "Heard about tonight. You okay?" How had she heard already? Then I remembered Jennifer and Lynn worked in the same building downtown. News traveled fast in our circle. "Fine," I typed back. "Just a misunderstanding." But as I sat there in the dark, surrounded by empty wine glasses and the lingering smell of expensive cheese, I had the strangest feeling that I'd just lost something I didn't even know I valued. Upstairs, Caleb's movements had gone quiet, and somehow that silence felt more ominous than any shouting match would have. The next morning, Caleb was gone before I woke up. His coffee cup was in the sink, rinsed clean, and there was a note on the counter. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the note, written in his careful handwriting, and felt a stab of something I didn't want to name. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But by the time I got to work, I'd pushed those feelings down. I was good at that, compartmentalizing, moving forward, not dwelling on things I couldn't change. "You look tired," said Marcus, the guy who worked in the cubicle next to mine. We'd always had a friendly, flirtatious relationship. Nothing serious, just the kind of harmless office banter that made the days go by faster. "Late night," I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. "Had some friends over." "Sounds fun. Your husband cook for everyone?" "Something like that," I said, not wanting to get into details. The morning passed normally enough. Emails, phone calls, the usual administrative chaos that came with managing schedules for a team of 12 financial advisors. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and I was good at it. Around lunch, my phone buzzed with a text from Jasper. "Heard you had quite the evening. You free for coffee?" Jasper Alden was an old college friend of Caleb's, though they'd grown apart over the years. Where Caleb had become serious and career-focused, Jasper had remained the life of the party, always ready with a joke, always pushing boundaries, always making people laugh, even when they probably shouldn't. We'd been friendly lately. Nothing inappropriate, just texting here and there, meeting for coffee when Caleb was working late. It was nice to have someone who appreciated my sense of humor, who didn't make me feel like I had to watch every word. "Sure," I texted back. "The usual place." An hour later, I was sitting across from Jasper at a little cafe downtown, telling him about the party, while he listened with an amused smile. "You actually said you could swap him out," he laughed, stirring his latte. "God, Ivadne, you've got balls." "It was just a joke," I said, but I was smiling too. He's being ridiculous about it. "Classic Caleb," Jasper said, rolling his eyes. Remember in college how he used to get all serious about everything? Some people just can't take a joke. That's what I'd been thinking, but hearing Jasper say it made me feel better. Validated. Exactly, I said. I mean, we've been married for 6 years. If I was going to leave him, don't you think I would have done it by now? Of course, Jasper said, leaning forward slightly. You're just having a little fun. Nothing wrong with that. We talked for another hour, and by the time I got back to the office, I was feeling much better about everything. Caleb would cool off, I'd apologize for the poor choice of words, and we'd move on. That's what married couples did. But when I got home that evening, the house felt different, colder somehow. Caleb was in his study, a small room off the living room that he'd claimed as his office space. The door was closed, which was unusual. Normally he worked at the kitchen table or on the couch, his papers spread out everywhere. Hey, I called out, dropping my purse on the counter. How was your day? Fine, came his voice through the door. Flat, neutral. I waited for him to come out to ask about my day, to make some kind of effort at normal conversation. But the door stayed closed. I picked up Chinese food, I tried, from that place you like. Not hungry. The words hit me like a slap. Caleb was always hungry. He was one of those people who ate dinner at exactly 6:30 every night, like clockwork. I stood there in the kitchen, holding containers of kung pao chicken and fried rice, feeling foolish and increasingly angry. This was ridiculous. So I'd made a stupid joke. It wasn't the end of the world. I ate alone, scrolling through social media to distract myself. That's when I saw the photos from last night's party. Jennifer had posted them, candid shots of all of us laughing, wine glasses raised, looking like we were having the time of our lives. In one photo, I was mid-sentence, gesturing with my wine glass, my head thrown back in laughter. I looked confident, powerful, free. I shared it to my own profile with the caption, Queen Energy with my girls. No apologies, now living my best life. Within minutes, I had likes and comments. Gorgeous. Love this. You look amazing. The validation felt good, better than sitting in a silent house, wondering if I should apologize for being myself. My phone rang. Lynn. Hey, sis, I answered, still scrolling through the comments on my post. We need to talk, Lynn said without preamble. What the hell happened last night? Jennifer has a big mouth, I said, irritated. It was nothing, just a joke that Caleb took the wrong way. Ivadne, Lynn's voice was serious. I saw the photos. You look... I look what? Happy, really happy. Like, happier than I've seen you in years. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an accusation. So maybe that's the problem. Maybe Caleb saw it too. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, but something cold settled in my stomach. When was the last time you looked that happy with your husband? I ended the call without answering, because I couldn't. The truth was, I couldn't remember the last time Caleb had made me laugh the way my friends did. The last time I'd felt that free, that much like myself, when he was around. But that wasn't my fault. That was just marriage, real life, the way things settled after the honeymoon phase wore off. Around 10 o'clock, Caleb finally emerged from his study. He moved through the kitchen like a ghost, getting a glass of water, not looking at me where I sat on the couch with my laptop. Caleb, I said as he headed for the stairs. Can we talk? He paused, his hand on the banister. About what? About last night. About us. For a moment, I thought he might come sit with me, might give me a chance to explain, to make this right. Instead, he said, I'm tired, Ivadne. Maybe tomorrow. But his voice told me there wouldn't be a tomorrow. Not the way there used to be. I stayed up late, scrolling through more photos, posting a few more with captions about independence and self-love. Each like, each comment, felt like proof that I wasn't crazy, that I deserved to feel good about myself. It wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that I noticed Caleb had moved some of his things. His extra phone charger was gone from the nightstand, The book he'd been reading was no longer on his side of the bed. Small things. Things I might not have noticed if I hadn't been looking. But I was looking now, and what I saw made my chest tight with something that felt suspiciously like panic. When I finally fell asleep, alone in our king-size bed, I dreamed about the sound of his chair scraping against the floor. Over and over, like an echo that wouldn't fade. The weekend came and went in a haze of polite distance. Caleb was present but not really there, helping with groceries, mowing the lawn, doing all the normal weekend husband things, while somehow managing to avoid any real conversation. By Monday, I was ready to put the whole thing behind us. I decided to take the high road, to apologize for my poor choice of words and move forward. We were adults. We could handle this. But when I got to work, Marcus was waiting by my desk with a strange expression. "Hey," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure," I said, settling into my chair. "What's up?" "It's probably nothing," he said, but his voice suggested otherwise. "But Jennifer's friend Amanda works for Peterson and Associates, right?" Peterson and Associates was one of our biggest clients. They sent us a lot of business, and maintaining that relationship was crucial for our team's numbers. "I think so," I said slowly. "Why?" "She sent them the photos from your party." The words hit me like ice water. "What photos?" "The ones you posted, the ones where you're—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not judging, but Mr. Peterson is pretty conservative, old school, and Amanda apparently thought he should know what kind of family values our company represents." I stared at him, my mouth suddenly dry. "That's insane. They were just photos of friends having dinner." "I know," Marcus said quickly. "But you know how these things get twisted, especially with the captions about being a queen and not apologizing and—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I could imagine how it looked to someone like Peterson, a married woman posting about independence and living her best life, surrounded by wine and laughter while her husband was nowhere to be seen. "What did they say?" I asked. "Nothing official, yet, but there's talk about reviewing our contract, making sure we're aligned with their values." I felt sick. Our team's bonuses were tied to the Peterson account. If we lost them because of my social media posts— "I should probably take those photos down," I said. "Probably a good idea," Marcus agreed, but his tone suggested it might already be too late. I spent my lunch break deleting posts, but the damage felt done. Every time someone looked at me that afternoon, I wondered if they had heard, if they were judging. By the time I got home, I was exhausted and angry. This was exactly the kind of thing that drove me crazy about small-town mentality. A woman couldn't even have fun with her friends without someone making it into a moral issue. Caleb was in the kitchen when I walked in, standing at the counter with a stack of papers spread out in front of him. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like sympathy in his eyes. "Rough day?" he asked. "You could say that," I said, dropping my purse and keys with more force than necessary. Apparently, having friends and posting photos makes me a bad person now. He nodded slowly, like he wasn't surprised. "The Peterson thing?" I stared at him. "How did you know about that?" "Richard mentioned it," he said, referring to his father who worked in the same industry. "Word travels fast." "Great," I said bitterly. "So now your whole family knows too." "It's not about my family," Caleb said quietly. "It's about consequences." Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. The papers on the counter weren't work documents, I realized. They were bank statements, insurance papers, the deed to our house. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Organizing," he said simply, "making sure everything's in order." "In order for what?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw that same calm certainty I'd seen the night of the party. "For whatever comes next." That night I called Jasper. I needed to talk to someone who understood, someone who wouldn't make me feel crazy for wanting to live my life. This is all so blown out of proportion, I told him, pacing around my bedroom while Caleb worked downstairs. It was just a joke, just some photos. Since when is it a crime to have fun? It's not, Jasper said firmly. You're being targeted because you're a strong woman who doesn't fit into their little box of what a wife should be. Exactly, I said, feeling validated. I refused to apologize for being myself. Good for you, he said. You want to grab coffee tomorrow? I hate seeing you so stressed about this. I agreed, and we talked for another hour. By the time I hung up, I felt better, clearer. Jasper was right. I was being punished for refusing to be the kind of quiet, submissive wife that people expected. But when I went downstairs to get some water, I found Caleb still at the kitchen table, now with a laptop open beside his papers. He was typing something, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. Working late? I asked. Something like that, he said without looking up. I moved closer, trying to see what he was working on, but he closed the laptop as I approached. It's late, he said, standing up and gathering his papers. I should get to bed. Caleb, I said as he headed for the stairs. Are we okay? He paused, his back to me. I don't know, Ivadne. Are we? It wasn't really an answer, but it felt like one anyway. That night, I lay awake listening to him breathe beside me, wondering when we'd become strangers sharing a bed. Wondering if this was what the end of a marriage felt like. Not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, quiet dissolution. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Heard about the Peterson situation. Maybe it's time to think about what really matters. I turned the phone face down and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure I knew what really mattered anymore. And that scared me more than I wanted to admit. The Peterson account was officially under review by Wednesday. My supervisor, Jeanette, called me into her office with the kind of expression that meant trouble. I need you to understand, she said, settling behind her desk with a stack of printed emails, that this isn't about your personal life, but when our clients start questioning our professionalism. I deleted the posts, I said quickly. All of them. I know, but screenshots are forever, Ivadne. And Amanda Peterson made sure her father-in-law saw everything before you had a chance to take them down. She slid one of the printed emails across the desk. It was from Peterson himself, asking for assurance that Hartley Financial maintains the family values that align with our company's mission. What does that even mean? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what it meant. It means they want to know you're not going to be a liability, Janet said bluntly. Look, I think this is ridiculous. What you do in your personal time is your business, but they're threatening to pull $1 million account over this. $1 million. My stomach dropped. What do you need me to do? I asked. Keep your head down. Stay off social media for a while. And maybe, she paused, looking uncomfortable. Maybe work on your image. Show them you're committed to your marriage, your family values, whatever that means. I left her office feeling humiliated and angry. This was 2024, not 1954. The idea that I needed to prove my commitment to my marriage to keep my job was insane. But when I got home that evening, ready to vent to Caleb about the injustice of it all, I found him in his study again. The door was closed, and I could hear him talking to someone on the phone. Yes, I understand the timeline, he was saying. How long does the process usually take? Process? What process? I pressed my ear to the door, but his voice had dropped too low to make out the words. When he finally emerged an hour later, his face was carefully neutral. Who are you talking to? I asked, trying to sound casual. Work stuff, he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. That night, I met Jasper for drinks at a bar downtown. I needed to get out of the house, away from Caleb's watchful silence and the growing pile of papers on his desk. You look stressed, Jasper said, sliding into the booth across from me. I am stressed, I said, taking a large gulp of wine. This whole Peterson thing is a nightmare, and Caleb is acting like... Like what? like he's planning something. He's been organizing papers, making phone calls, acting all secretive. Jasper leaned back, considering. Maybe he's finally realizing what he's got. Maybe this whole thing scared him into appreciating you more. I wanted to believe that, but something in my gut said otherwise. I don't think so. He's been different since the party. Cold. His loss, Jasper said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. You deserve someone who appreciates your spirit. The touch was brief, innocent, but it felt good to be appreciated, to be seen as someone worth caring about instead of someone who needed to be managed and controlled. We talked for 2 hours, and by the time I got home, I felt better, stronger. Jasper was right. I deserved better than walking on eggshells in my own marriage. But when I walked into the house, I found Caleb waiting in the living room with a manila folder in his hands. We need to talk, he said. Something in his tone made me stop short. About what? About this, he said, opening the folder and pulling out a printed photo. It was a picture of me and Jasper at the bar, his hand covering mine across the table. Someone had taken it from outside and sent it to... Who? Caleb? It's not what it looks like, I said quickly. What does it look like, Ivadne? I stared at him, at the photo, at the folder that probably contained God knew what else. It looks like 2 friends having a conversation. Does it? He set the photo on the coffee table between us. Because to me, it looks like my wife holding hands with my former friend while I'm at home, wondering why our marriage is falling apart. We weren't holding hands, I protested. He was just being supportive. I needed someone to talk to. About what? About you, I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. About how you've been treating me since that stupid party. About how you're making me feel like a criminal for having friends. Caleb nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he already knew. So this is my fault. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He closed the folder and stood up. I'm going to stay at my parents' house for a few days. Caleb, wait, I said, but he was already heading for the stairs. I'll be back for my things this weekend, he called over his shoulder. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the photo on the coffee table, feeling like my life was spinning out of control. This was all so stupid, so blown out of proportion. I called Jasper, but it went to voicemail. I called Lynn, but she didn't answer either. Finally, I called my mother. Oh, honey, she said when I told her what happened. Men can be so dramatic about these things. Right? I said, grateful for the support. It's like he wants me to have no friends, no life outside of our marriage. Some men are like that, Mum agreed. They want to control everything. You're a strong, independent woman, Ivadne. Don't let him make you feel bad for that. We talked for an hour, and by the time I hung up, I felt vindicated. This wasn't about me doing anything wrong. This was about Caleb being insecure and controlling. But as I got ready for bed in our empty house, I couldn't shake the image of that folder. The careful way he'd opened it, like he'd been preparing for this conversation, like he'd been building a case. Caleb stayed away for 4 days. 4 days of silence that felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. I threw myself into damage control at work, staying late, being extra helpful, trying to prove that I was a dedicated employee, despite the Peterson situation. But the whispers followed me everywhere. In the break room, by the copy machine, in the elevator. I heard she was having an affair, someone said behind me in line at the cafeteria. With her husband's friend, no less, came the reply. I wanted to turn around and set the record straight, but what was the point? The truth was already twisted beyond recognition. On Thursday, Janet called me into her office again. Peterson pulled the account, she said without preamble. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? They sent a formal letter this morning. They're terminating their contract effective immediately. I stared at her, my mouth dry. Because of me. They didn't say that explicitly. They cited philosophical differences and changing business needs. But we both know what this is really about. Janet, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. She held up a hand. I know, and I want you to know that I fought for you. But the partners are concerned about your judgment, about your commitment to the company's reputation. What does that mean? It means you're on probation. 90 days. Keep your head down, do good work, and hopefully this will all blow over. Probation. The word followed me home like a dark cloud. The house felt different without Caleb in it, smaller somehow, but also emptier. I found myself listening for his key in the door, for the sound of his voice calling out that he was home, but he didn't come home. On Friday, Jasper texted, "Heard about Peterson, want to talk?" I almost said yes, almost agreed to meet him for coffee or drinks or whatever would make me feel less alone. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of that photo, the way it had looked to Caleb, the way it probably looked to everyone else. "I think I need some space," I texted back. "From me," he replied. "Ivadne, we're just friends. Don't let Caleb's paranoia ruin that." But were we just friends? Looking back at our coffee dates, our long phone conversations, the way he touched my hand and told me I deserved better, was that really just friendship? I didn't reply to his text. Saturday morning, Caleb came back for his things. I heard his key in the door and rushed downstairs, hoping we could finally talk this through like adults. But he wasn't alone. His father, Richard, was with him, and his sister Lydia, both of them carrying empty boxes. "Hi," I said awkwardly, standing in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. "Ivadne." Richard nodded politely. Lydia didn't acknowledge me at all. "Caleb," I said, focusing on my husband, "can we please talk?" "I think we've said everything we need to say," he replied, not looking at me. "No, we haven't. This is ridiculous. We're married. We should be working through this together, not whatever this is." Lydia snorted. "Working through what? You cheating on him?" "I didn't cheat," I said quickly. "Jasper and I are just friends." "Right," Lydia said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just like that comment about swapping him out was just a joke." "It was a joke." "Funny how your jokes keep hurting the people who love you," she shot back. "Lydia," Caleb said quietly. "That's enough." But the damage was done. I could see it in Richard's face, the way he looked at me like I was something distasteful he'd found on his shoe. They spent 2 hours packing. Caleb's clothes, his books, his laptop, the framed photos from his desk. I watched from the kitchen, feeling like a stranger in my own home. When they were done, Caleb paused in the doorway. "I'll be in touch about next steps," he said. "Next steps?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "We can't keep living like this, Ivadne. Something has to change." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the echoes of their voices and the empty spaces where his things used to be. I spent the rest of the weekend in a haze, alternating between anger and panic. This was all so stupid, so unnecessary. We were throwing away 6 years of marriage over what? Some photos, some gossip, a stupid joke I'd made at a party. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was the distance that had been growing between us for months. The way I'd been pulling away, seeking validation elsewhere, building a life that didn't include him. The way I'd stopped seeing him as a partner and started seeing him as an obstacle to my happiness. Sunday evening, my phone rang. Lynn. "I heard about Caleb moving out," she said without preamble. "News travels fast," I said bitterly. "Ivadne, what are you doing?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you trying to save your marriage, or are you trying to prove a point?" The question caught me off guard. I'm trying to save my marriage, but I'm not going to grovel for something that wasn't my fault. "Wasn't your fault." Lynn's voice rose. "You humiliated him in front of your friends. You've been sneaking around with Jasper for months. You lost $1 million account because you couldn't keep your personal drama off social media. How is none of this your fault?" "I never cheated," I said defensively. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. Come on, Ivadne. You've been checked out of your marriage for months. The words stung because they were true, but I wasn't ready to admit that, not even to myself. I have to go, I said, and hung up. That night, I lay in our king-size bed, surrounded by empty space and the lingering scent of Caleb's cologne on his pillow. For the first time since this whole thing started, I let myself really think about what I was losing. Not just my marriage, but my best friend. The person who brought me coffee in the morning and remembered my favorite Chinese restaurant and picked up dessert on his way home from work because he thought it would make me smile. When had I stopped appreciating those things? When had I started taking him for granted? But even as the question swirled in my head, my pride wouldn't let me reach for my phone. Wouldn't let me call him and admit that maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong. Instead, I pulled his pillow closer and tried to pretend that the wetness on my cheeks was anything but tears. Monday morning brought a registered letter. I signed for it at the front door, my hands shaking slightly as I recognized the return address. Davidson, Miller and Associates, a law firm. Inside was a thick packet of papers with a cover letter that began, "Please be advised that we represent Caleb Michael Hartley in the matter of dissolution of marriage." Divorce papers. I sank onto the front steps, still in my pajamas, reading words that didn't seem real. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets, temporary restraining order, preventing disposal of marital property. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note in Caleb's careful script. Peace is better than pretending. I looked up from the papers and saw him, across the street, leaning against his car, watching me with that same calm certainty I'd seen the night of the party. He wasn't gloating, wasn't angry, just finished. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something in his face that made my chest tight. Relief, like he'd been holding his breath for months and could finally exhale. I wanted to run to him, to throw the papers in his face, and demand we talk this through like adults. But my legs wouldn't move, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this moment had been inevitable, since the night I'd smiled and said I could swap him out any time. He got in his car and drove away without looking back. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and panic. I called 3 lawyers before finding one who could see me that afternoon. I called in sick to work. I called my mother, who immediately started ranting about men and their egos. But I didn't call Caleb. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, spread the papers across her conference table and delivered the news with professional efficiency. "He's been preparing for this for weeks," she said, flipping through page after page of documentation. Bank records, phone records, social media screenshots, witness statements from the party, photos of you with... "Jasper Alden, is it?" "We were just friends," I said automatically. "Maybe, but he has text messages between you two that suggest otherwise. Nothing explicitly sexual, but intimate, emotional." She showed me printouts of conversations I barely remembered. Late-night texts about how unhappy I was. Jasper's responses about how I deserved better. My complaints about Caleb being cold and distant. Seeing it all laid out like that, in black and white, it looked exactly like what it was. An emotional affair. "The good news," Patricia continued, "is that California is a no-fault state. The infidelity won't affect the financial settlement. The bad news is that he's asking for spousal support." "Spousal support? But he makes more than I do." "Not anymore. According to these documents, you're likely to lose your job due to the Peterson situation. He's claiming that your extramarital relationship damaged both your reputation and your earning capacity, making you a financial liability." The words hit me like ice water. He can't do that. He can try. And given the documentation he has... She gestured to the stack of papers. He might succeed. I left the lawyer's office in a daze. Everything was falling apart so fast I couldn't keep up. My marriage, my job, my reputation. all of it crumbling because of choices I'd convinced myself were harmless. That evening, I tried calling Jasper. I needed someone to tell me this wasn't all my fault, that I wasn't the villain in this story. But his phone went straight to voicemail. When I tried again an hour later, I got a text. "Think it's best if we don't talk for a while. Sorry. Sorry." After months of telling me I deserved better, of encouraging me to stand up for myself, of being the shoulder I cried on, now he was sorry. I sat in my empty living room, surrounded by the remnants of the life I'd built with Caleb, and finally understood what I'd lost. It wasn't just a marriage. It was partnership. It was having someone who knew how I liked my coffee, and which side of the bed I preferred, and the exact way to make me laugh when I'd had a bad day. It was having someone who loved me enough to try, even when I made it impossible. I thought about the night of the party, the way I'd sat there smiling while he walked away, how I'd chosen my pride over his dignity, my image over his feelings. I thought about all the times he'd tried to connect with me in the weeks that followed, and how I'd brushed him off or made him the enemy. I thought about the careful way he'd organized those papers, the methodical documentation of everything I'd done. Not out of spite, but out of necessity, because I'd made it clear that I didn't want to be married to him anymore. I'd just been too cowardly to say it out loud. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Don't let him bully you. Fight this." But I was tired of fighting. Tired of pretending this was all someone else's fault. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and opened the drawer where Caleb used to keep his things. It was empty except for a single item, the wedding photo from our nightstand. In it, we were both laughing, his arm around my waist, my hand on his chest. We looked happy, in love, like people who would never hurt each other the way we had. I picked up the photo and studied our younger faces, trying to remember what it felt like to be that version of myself, the version who saw Caleb as a gift instead of a burden. But that woman was gone. She'd been replaced by someone bitter and selfish, and convinced that happiness was something that happened to you instead of something you built with another person. The divorce would go through. I would lose the house, probably my job, definitely my reputation. I would have to start over at 34, alone and broke, and carrying the weight of my own choices. But maybe that was what I deserved. Maybe that was the price of learning too late, that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing to be better for someone who chooses the same for you. I set the photo back in the drawer and closed it softly. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, normal families having normal evenings, probably taking for granted the simple miracle of being known and loved and chosen every day. I'd had that once, and I'd thrown it away for the temporary high of feeling desired by someone who disappeared the moment things got complicated. The legal papers were still scattered across the coffee table downstairs, waiting for my signature, waiting for me to make it official. I would sign them, not because I had to, but because Caleb was right. Peace was better than pretending, and maybe, if I was very lucky, someday I would find someone else worth building a life with, someone I wouldn't take for granted, someone I would choose every day, the way Caleb had chosen me, until I made it impossible. But first, I had to learn to live with the woman I'd become. The woman who smiled while breaking her husband's heart, who chose pride over love, who learned too late that some jokes aren't funny and some choices can't be undone. I picked up a pen and began to sign.